Greetings, bike travelers and bike packers. Welcome to the Chain Wheel Diaries podcast and the first episode of 2025. Stories about bike travel told by the travelers themselves. I'm your host, Brian Berlin. For 2025, I want to start with the subject of mental health. 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year. But how many times have you seen it written on a poster or you've heard it from a fellow bicycler that going on a great bike adventure is all you need to work through your mental health challenges? That's certainly not true for everyone. And my guest today, Bryan Rogala, can attest to that. Bryan wrote an article that was published last December in the Adventure Cycling magazine, where he opened up about his mental health challenges and his discovery that just writing is not a cure for deeper issues. Therapy and medication have helped him find balance in his life. Perhaps you've struggled with depression and/or anxiety, and getting outdoors and being active has only temporarily provided relief. If so, you'll want to listen to Bryan's story, and hopefully you'll find the inspiration and support you need to ask for help. Because our mental health is important to ourselves and to our friends and family members. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Bryan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with some introductions. Let me go first. I'm a bicycler, bike travel enthusiast, and I started this podcast a few years ago to interview bike travelers and bike packers and utilize their stories to encourage and inspire others to do the same. So I appreciate you coming on board today. What about you? Tell the audience about yourself and what you're currently up to.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. My name is Bryan Rogala. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I used to work for Outside Magazine for quite a while. That's what brought me here to Santa Fe in the first place. I'm a video producer and writer, is kind of my main form of work. And I love to mountain bike and ski and play outside here in Santa Fe as much as possible. So this summer I rode the Great Divide mountain bike route from Antelope Wells, New Mexico. So started down near my hometown and then rode up and finished in Banff about 6 weeks later.
I know you chose to go south to north. I guess it was a matter of convenience, but did that make it any more difficult or just?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So, it was both a matter of convenience and I had done a bunch of research prior to the trip, and a good friend of mine suggested going south to north for a variety of reasons, but weather was a big one. And the fire season, as we see kind of every year, it gets a little more challenging on that trail in particular, up north, Canadian wildfires and stuff going on in Montana, Wyoming. So it just makes it a little trickier to time it right. And by going south to north, you can kind of avoid some of the really hot time periods down south. You can avoid some of the monsoons down here in New Mexico, and then hopefully avoid the fire season up north, which I got really lucky. And there were some big fires up there in Banff and the northern part of the route that kind of started maybe a week after I got off the trail. So some folks that I'd met who were kind of on a different time frame and stuff like that, they were like inundated with smoke and whatnot, and I lucked out and got out of there before all that happened. So
the reason I asked you on this podcast is that I was reading the Adventure Cycling Journal. I'm a member, and I've taken advantage of a tour of theirs, and really love the magazine. But December 3rd, 2024, an article, Me, Myself, and I, that you wrote. And I got to tell you, it really hit me. It moved me. And I don't want to give away the whole story here. So I'll just say you came to the realization that just riding your bike, while enjoyable, was not enabling you to confront the real issue. So let's start there.
Yeah, yeah. You know, so basically, I for a long time had struggled with anxiety and depression and some mental health stuff. And I for a long time thought that, you know, exercising, particularly riding my bike, was the way to deal with that. And as you said, and as I sort of laid out in that article, I think I came to a realization finally that that was not enough for me. And I think that is something, my hope in writing that article was that perhaps there are other cyclists and other outdoors, folks that kind of have a similar mindset. I think cycling in particular, a lot of times it's like you just got to grin and bear it and kind of spin up that hill or whatever it is. And so it lends itself to this sort of, suck it up kind of mentality and mindset. And yeah, and that didn't cut it for me. And so I finally kind of realized that. And I'd been seeing a therapist for a long time, and that is profoundly helpful. And then finally, I realized that wasn't enough either, and went on some medication that really helped and changed my life. So yeah, I think that particular story. I had also ridden the Colorado Trail, did a bikepacking trip on that maybe 5 years prior, and that sort of played into that a little bit. I had done this big adventure and done this big trip and come back from that. And I think when you come back from a big journey like that, I think there's often this sense of like, what's next? And you sort of find yourself, or at least I found myself wondering what I was going to do next and all this. And I think that certainly contributed to it. And it was one of those things where, if I'm out on a trip or doing something like that, I'm often fine. But then when I'm home and not riding my bike literally for 10 hours a day, the realities of everyday life kind of sink in. And yeah, so that's a long sort of rambling answer to your question there, but that's kind of the basis of that article.
Well, that's the right answer. Well, a couple of things. I've interviewed many people who have finished long bike rides. My friend Chris Compton rode from Palm Beach to Seattle. And when he finished, there was this huge letdown because every day for 3 months, he knew that he was going to get on his bike and ride somewhere. He had no idea what he was going to experience. He didn't know what he was going to discover that day. He didn't know who he might meet and become friends with. He didn't know if he'd have a flat or a mechanical breakdown.
Sure.
And suddenly all that was over. And now he didn't have that kind of that structure. And he said it was depressing. And, it really took him a couple of weeks to bounce back. Go ahead. You wanted to make a
No, I
comment.
was just going to say, I know that feeling very well, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a letdown. Thing two is we're both Midwesterners. I grew up in Kansas.
Hmm.
And culturally, um, not cool for men to open up about their feelings
Right.
um, to anybody, and more or less, like you said, grin and bear it, but suppress issues that may be bothering them. And um, depression that's the one where it's kind of tricky because you don't always know the depth of how bad it is. You may feel like, I'm a little down in the dumps,
Right.
I'll go ride my bike, but it could be deeper than that.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one thing that for me, I think that I found was, once I started seeking some help outside of just exercise and riding my bike, and started seeing a therapist and stuff like that, as you become aware um, of some of these other emotions that you've got, and you become aware of just how sort of deep and underlying some of these feelings are. And I think once you realize that, it's just, for me, it was sort of this, opening that appeared, this door kind of opened up, and I was like, oh wow, this is a little bigger than a spin around the local trailhead is gonna, it's gonna fix.
you rode with friends on the Colorado Trail, right?
I did. Yeah.
So you had some companionship, but your return was to ride the divide solo. So you would be out there mostly by yourself with your thoughts and the sound of your wheels. So it turns out that worked out okay. But tell me a little bit more about as you're riding along. Did any thoughts creep in about the past?
Yeah, certainly. A piece of this is that for a long time there, before I started medication, I would go on these long training rides and long bike rides and stuff like that. And you know, those were helpful and then they weren't helpful. And then, in fact, they became more of a problem because it's sort of all that alone time for somebody, with anxiety and depression is not always a great recipe. So, this divide ride, that was my sort of biggest fear or trepidation going into the ride was just, this is going to be, 6 weeks, of ride time. And the vast majority of it, or yeah, the vast majority of it was just me cranking out there on the bike. And the what one thing I will say about the Great Divide mountain bike route is it's a lot more social, even if you do it by yourself, than I had anticipated going into it. So that certainly was helpful to me. There's so many people that you meet, whether they're northbounders, and you're riding the opposite direction or what have you, or just folks that you run into just as you run your bike, trail angels, all that sort of stuff. So it's a much more travel oriented and social thing than like the Colorado Trail, I would say. Whereas the Colorado Trail, you're sort of, just out in the wilderness for 14 days or whatever it is. So that helped, but there's still a lot of lonely miles on the bike out there. And what I think what I found this time was that yes, certainly I thought about things in the past, or certainly I thought about there were days I did not want to get on that bike and pedal anymore, and I was just like totally beat down physically or whatever. But I found it all a lot more manageable this time, and I think one of the lines in the story I read was, I had more tools in my arsenal this time, and that's probably the truest, I think, phrase of the whole ride for me is that I went in sort of knowing what could happen and what to expect and knowing where my mind goes and also knowing how to deal with that better.
Well, props to you. That's a rugged ride. I've watched many videos of it. Ryan Van Duzer and many,
Sure.
many others. And then there's the Great Divide, which is a race on that, which is unfathomable to me because it's almost nonstop. Those people are genuinely crazy. I think they go so fast and so far that they don't have time for any negative thoughts
I
to.
think that's exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, it's funny. One time I passed the Tour Divide racers as I was going north, and passed, not I passed them, but we crossed paths. They were coming southbound, and it was pretty interesting to see the difference in the folks that were touring versus the folks that were racing. And actually, one of the sort of, I don't know if it's a lower moment of mine on the trail was this kind of this feeling of being just touring as you have all these racers coming by. Because I think for a while there, you meet these people, you tell them what you're doing, and they're like, "Man, that's really cool. You rode your bike here from Mexico, And then these racers come by, and you're kind of like, oh, these guys are doing the real, you know what I mean? So it's this sort of a funny thing to now looking back on to look at and go, wow, yeah, you still did a great thing. You're just not quite as crazy as these guys that just don't sleep and, all that stuff. So,
You had a lot of time to yourself, but you also had some moments when you weren't off the bike. You're camping, so you're spending nights. And um, did you have, in those moments, did you dwell on any thoughts, or did you conjure up like, I'm really doing this, I'm feeling good, and I think I can do this? And not wanting to get on the bike is not really a mental health
no,
emergency. I,
right.
I experience that a lot, so we can set that part aside. Physically,
Totally.
that is something that happens on long rides.
Yes.
But did you? did you have the opportunity to kind of have a conversation with yourself about, look how far I've come?
Sure. Yeah, many opportunities, look how far I've come. There were a few moments of like sort of why am I doing this, right? But I think that sort of stuff I think comes along with any long ride like that. I'm pretty happy to say I didn't really have or experience a true mental health crisis or anything like that out there. Which going into it, did not know how that was going to go. So I was, yeah, this trip, aside from the typical, not wanting to get on your bike the next day kind of thing, and the I'm sure you get 4 weeks into a 6 week long ride like that, and you start to kind of wonder, should I like I've kind of already ridden a long way. Do I need to keep going? That sort of stuff. But no, otherwise, yeah, I was in a much better place this time around for sure.
Excellent. Last year, I lost a friend. He took his own life. Um, the people that knew him, and we were all friends, um, never caught the signs,
Mhm.
never dreamed that there was this deep of a problem going on. And I've been kicking myself a lot about that because, um, we talked to him, we saw him, and why didn't we pick up on anything? And I think that's, partly the ability for men to suppress that so deeply and put on a happy face that it fools everybody.
Yeah,
But if he would have just opened up and said, look, you know, I got divorced, I'm away from my kids, my career's not going well, I need help. Come on, guys, help me out.
right.
And everybody would have rallied to the cause. But we missed that opportunity. So I can't emphasize enough that if you're in that state of mind, if that's what's troubling you, climbing Mount Everest is not going to resolve that.
Right.
And you mentioned several good articles about how some writers have, and doctors and people have suggested that, yeah, just get outdoors
Yeah.
and shake this, but it's not that simple. My friend couldn't have done that. He could have ridden across the United States on a bicycle, on a unicycle. None of this would have mattered. The accomplishment wouldn't have meant anything. The journey would have been a disaster.
Yeah, I think so that, A, very sorry for your loss there. B, I I think what you mentioned about us being able to suppress that deeply is part of the reason that I wrote this piece, right? Is that I had not talked about this. I think a lot of folks, including my editor that I worked with at Adventure Cycling, who's a longtime colleague of mine at past organizations and a friend, like he was pretty shocked when I sent that article in, and he was just like, "Man, I had no idea this was
No
going
idea.
on." Yeah. And so I think it's a pretty common thing when it comes to mental health troubles and depression, especially. And I think people, myself included, can be really good at hiding that. And I think part of me wanting to write that was an attempt to sort of be better about talking about it, be more open about it. And I was pleased you reached out and wanted me on the podcast because I think talking about this stuff is important. And that's what, hopefully can give other folks, the not permission structure, but just sort of make them feel a little bit better about sharing their experiences as well. And I think, you know, I don't know, and you can probably speak to this being a Midwesterner as well, but I think there are things you don't talk about growing up, right? Like you don't talk about religion and politics and all that sort of stuff. And I think falls into that category. And there are a lot more people out there who I think struggle with this type of thing than any of us would probably think. And, if you think that you don't have a friend or a family member or someone who struggles with mental health issues, then take another look at that because you probably do, I think is what I would say.
Pay attention.
Pay attention.
So, so when would you say you first opened up to your friends or a friend? You probably opened up to your wife.
Yep.
But
Sure.
when did you open up to your friends and what kind of reactions did you get?
I opened up to my friends about, I mean, it's a thing I work on all the time still, is opening up to my friends about it and opening up to people. But I have opened up to my friends about it, and the reaction was incredibly positive. It wasn't until I had started seeing a therapist and kind of just became more comfortable in general with talking about this sort of thing, that I went to my friends about it, but I did. And it's pretty scary. First time you kind of open up about it, even to people you love and know care about you and all that. Um, but the reaction was overwhelmingly positive, and everybody, just like you were talking about before, everybody rallies around you, and there's a lot of I had no ideas, and there's a lot of oh my gosh, I can't believe you're struggling, and talk to me about it, and so I think it's everybody's you know, if you have good friends, they're going to be there for you, is what I would say. That was my experience.
Yeah, the therapy part, I think, is a non-starter for a lot of people that could definitely use therapy to
Right.
dig down deep. And that's a huge step for anyone to consider to take, much less actually take, but it's an important one. I mean, I think of Tony Soprano, and he starts out in therapy. He's a gangster, he's a mobster. He's he's got depression and anxiety, and he goes to a therapist. I thought that was the biggest breakthrough, one of the
Yeah.
biggest breakthroughs I've seen in, television, portraying someone who is a somewhat normal someone who is struggling with mental health.
Right.
And I don't know if you read it. Born to Run is Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, and he spends a lot of time in the latter part of the book opening up publicly about his mental health issues. I had no idea.
Yeah.
We're starting to say that a lot, Bryan. But I had no idea. Here's Bruce Springsteen. He's world famous. He's rich. He's happy? Apparently not.
Right.
And has gone through years and years and years of therapy, to get at, what is the root cause of this? He had these crying jags where he would start crying. He couldn't stop crying.
Yeah.
And his wife at the time, Patty Schaufel, took him to a doctor and said, give him some medication and help him stop crying. And then we'll get to the root problem, but you've got to stop him from crying because he's literally, it's tearing him apart. But
Sure.
here are people, here's a guy that's, come out publicly in a book, and admitted that, he's had mental health challenges. And I thought that was fantastic that he was so candid about it, because I think that's what people want to hear that may be struggling out there. Maybe you've had a similar experience. What motivated you to seek therapy?
Yeah, well, I mean, it helps that my wife was a social worker and a therapist, so I definitely had a little extra persuasion on that end of things. But one of the things for me, particularly with the medication piece of this, is I got to a point where I mean, what you just said about Springsteen and some of that experience is like rings very true for me. I would have these sort of moments where I would just tear up and be so tearful and crying and stuff. And I couldn't quite tell you why, to be honest. And and then I would get in this sort of cycle of, well, everything's great. Why, my life's great and all these things. And that's not particularly helpful either. And so there was a point where it's like, I can't even, begin to sort of, uh, regulate some of the use some of these skills that I've learned in therapy until we can stop the crying fits essentially, right? And so that's where the medication piece helped me a lot. I also, and I think part of my struggle too was thinking that is always thinking that people who need to see a therapist or who might need some help have real problems, right?
Hmm.
And so, and to me, I'm particularly hard on myself, and so real problems, that's like, oh, they have real problems. I don't have those problems, kind of thing, and not in a belittling way, but just in a they must be really struggling and I'm not sort of way. And so that is something that's taken me a long time to kind of get through. And sort of, I had that block when it came to starting medication for the first time and thinking that my troubles and things were sort of real enough to warrant that. And I think a lot of that just comes from, growing up in a kind of Midwestern culture of not talking about this sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's just again important to kind of be as open as possible about this stuff and just realize that it's a pretty normal thing. So
You made me think of the Silver Linings Playbook, where the couple are comparing or trying to outdo each
oh
other on
yeah,
their mental health.
right. That's a
Your
great
problems are worse than my problems, and uh, yeah, that's probably not true.
right.
But it made for a good movie. So here are some of the reasons that men don't ask for help. There's the social stigma, there are cultural expectations, and a lack of awareness, I think, is one thing that um, that therapy will help. But also, if someone is able to, within their circle, ask for help, um, they might not recognize the signs of mental health issues and understand the benefits of therapy. I think that's a concern about, um, I don't really have, like you said before, I don't think I have huge mental health issues, nothing that I can't handle. I'll just hop on my bike, or I'll get on the Pacific Crest Trail or something
Right.
like that. But helping, it's an awareness, and helping people understand that, if you're experiencing any of these kinds of symptoms, it's worth a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I just thought of this, and you mentioned this before, but I think the outdoor industry and in general, I think is so good at so many things. But this aspect of mental health and sort of talking about it and talking about, you know, sometimes you do need a little more help than just getting outside. I don't think they're particularly great at that, and I include myself in that. But in that article, I did reference some other stories that have been written and whatnot, and I think there is, and maybe you have this experience too, but I think there is this, very much a go climb a peak, go outside, go camping. Oh, you need to get off screens and you need to just go out in the woods for a week and you'll be fine when you come back. It's sort of an idea. And I do think that stuff is important. I do think obviously exercise is incredibly helpful. Riding your bike's incredibly helpful, all these things. But I guess my point is just that sometimes that's not enough and you do need more help. And I think it's important that as an industry, we recognize that.
And your article, if it's well read, and I certainly hope it is, hopefully will turn on a light bulb for people who said, I think I've been grappling with this, and I was trying to self-medicate with, getting outdoors and doing, a lot of fun stuff. And yet I'd get home and then I'd be brooding and depressed, and the lights are all off, and I'm sitting there alone in my thoughts, and my thoughts aren't good. Um, you know, those are the people that I hope this article reaches, because I think at one time you probably were that person, and
Absolutely.
you took charge and you wanted to do something about it.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Cool. All right. Well, a little public service announcement here before we wrap. If you or someone you know is experiencing depression and needs immediate support, here are some hotlines. There's the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline, That's dial 988 for free. It's confidential. SAM HSA's national helpline. I'll post all these at the end of the podcast. Confidential help with mental health issues. Crisis text line. You can text HOME, HOME in all caps, to 741-741, also free. And finally, remember, reaching out for help is a sign of strength. You're not alone, and there are people ready to support you. Bryan, this has been an awesome conversation. I have the deepest respect for you for coming out and identifying your challenges and dealing with your challenges and possibly creating an inspiration or a path for other people to do the same. And I certainly hope so.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And I certainly hope that this conversation and that article can help some other people out.